Meet one of Jamaica's Assistant Commissioners of Police, Les Green. For the past 8 years, he's led the extremely successful Operation Kingfish, headed the Serious and Organized Crime Division, solved some of the island's most high-profile cases, and been credited with transforming and modernizing the Jamaica Constabulary Force, JCF. Now he's leaving, preparing for a life of retirement in his native London. But there's a lot you probably don't know about Les Green. Who is Les Green? How would you describe yourself?
That's always a good question, and it's something I haven't really reflected on that much. But I mean, certainly I'm a family man. I have my wife and 2 children who are very dear and close to me, and although it's been quite difficult over the last 8 years because we've lived quite a distant family, especially most of that time. But my son and daughter have just recently graduated from college and university as such. So in further back, then it's been a long time in the policing world. It's 38.5 years. Starting in London and doing all my service in London until I came out here in 2004. So it's about working with the people, a very enjoyable experience over the time, and certainly the last 8 years in Jamaica has really been an opportunity for me, most likely to finish at a high with all of that experience and opportunity that I've had to serve and to provide reassurance and protection to the people of London and ultimately Jamaica.
When you were growing up, did you imagine that you would become a police officer?
No, far from it. I mean, certainly when I first started I was very much a farm boy. My father had a farm and I loved living in the country and on the farm. Then we moved to the town as such, into London. And that's when I really started to be interested in the policing and joining the police force.
Would you say this is your passion?
Well, it certainly has been. It's been my life since I was 16. So certainly after leaving school I went directly into the policing and I've been there ever since. So it has to be.
16?
Yes, as the police cadets in London.
Wow.
Which was a very vibrant organisation at that time, but unfortunately is very much diminished now. But I mean, at that time there was up to 1,000 police cadets in London, and it was a very good opportunity to learn about policing right from the beginning and be involved in a lot of community and cultural events initially, and then obviously when you become 18.5 you join the police force as a constable and you start to work for a living.
When you were approached about this job in Jamaica, what made you say yes? What attracted you to this job?
Well, I was already working on Operation Trident, but was working with the black community in London, dealing with gun crime within the black community, although that now has extended right across gun crime in London in general. So I had a very close working relationship with Jamaicans and with persons from the Caribbean, both as witnesses, victims, and unfortunately as well as suspects. And so it was a good opportunity then to identify some of the issues that face the Caribbean, but in particular Jamaica. There's no doubt there's a big disproportionality in relation to those who are involved in gun crime in London, and a lot of those issues stem back from Jamaica. So back in 2004, when Operation Kingfish was being considered, the Metropolitan Police was asked to support that, and I was fortunate enough to be selected to come out here to lead the team to help to set up a very successful Operation Kingfish.
So in a sense it was an opportunity to attack the source of the problem, since you said much of it came back from, or dated back to Jamaica.
Yes, certainly from a UK perspective. Unfortunately there's this real issue about the disproportionality of Jamaicans in particular, but persons from within the black community that have been involved in gun crime. And again, unfortunately, the prison population in the UK is very heavily again, disproportionately balanced in relation to young black youth. And it is the youth who seem to have lost somehow their roots, lost their family role models, and are easily then manipulated and led by persons who want to use them and misuse their enthusiasm for life. So there is a real problem with about 14, 15-year-olds in the UK in particular, but other countries as well, where they find a way of turning the potential for good into potential for evil, and actually are involved in many crimes, especially violent crimes. So there needs to still be more work around that, but it was interesting coming to Jamaica and seeing as well the issues here are very similar to the issues in the UK. And there is a lot of social and economic problems. There's a lot of breakdowns in families. The family unit doesn't really exist anymore, unfortunately, in Jamaica as it used to be.
Despite the vast racial and economic differences between Jamaica and England, Green says policing the two islands is startlingly similar. And in both places, it's the little things that count. He says the biggest complaint the police deal with daily is not shootings or any form of violence, it's noise.
A lot more complaints are about noise and antisocial type of issues, behaviour, inconsiderate driving and things like this, rather than reports of violence. And again, it's those daily interactions with the community that the citizens get upset about most. And when you have a community meeting, or I've appeared on a number of radio hosts, talk shows, etc., the biggest complaint, first of all, is about speeding, about traffic or noise. They're all interrelated. And it's those social issues of policing that are the same in London as they are here. The violence level is different, but it's the interaction with the community and the policing at that low level that's so important, and that's where we really need to make sure we build on community policing, build on a strategy with the people and with the police to actually address the social issues first of all. And when you can get the social issues better for a community, then the other issues will fall in line as well.
But make no mistake, as much as petty crimes are on the police's radar, the JCF also has its daily fill of violent crimes. For years, the island's homicide rate has been among the top 3 in the world, but that's changed drastically.
In the last, since 2009, we've now had less murders, and that equates to 1,300 lives have been saved since 2009. We had a very bad year in 2009. Certainly in the first part of 2010 it was on a similar sort of level, but since then we've had dramatic reductions, a 33% reduction in murders, which is absolutely unheralded, and that's a consistent activity by the police, by the security forces, but above all by the people.
Now you mentioned the tremendous drop in violent crimes, 33% you said. If you had to pinpoint one specific thing, to what would you attribute this tremendous decrease?
Well, that's obvious. I mean, May 2010 was a very significant time, and certainly we saw a fundamental change in the mindset of both the security forces and the people, and particularly also the criminals. For certainly at that time, the security forces working together was able to show that there isn't any safe havens, that so-called protected areas do not exist anymore. And that has had a very significant change on the situation.
But while the Tivoli incursion represented a paradigm shift in Jamaica, the fact is that at least 73 civilians lost their lives. The security forces have since been blamed for grave human rights injustices, but Green says it was unavoidable.
Certainly, there was a tragic loss of life, both with the security forces and the public, and that's very much regretted. But the situation was a situation that, despite the best efforts, just wasn't able to be resolved without violence. The violence was presented to the security forces, and the security forces had to respond. There was an awful lot of attempts prior to that to find a way of reconciling the situation, and they failed. So there was no other solution other than putting the security forces into an effective plan that they had to deliver the outcome that we had. Fortunately, the loss of life wasn't as much as maybe many had feared it could have been. So although there are certainly some allegations of injustice, this is why we need to make sure that there's robust independent investigations. And when the outcomes of the reports are published, then the next stage, if it needs to follow on, will follow on. Certainly there needs to be at least a coroner's inquest. If not, so there has been some calls for a public inquiry.
There are also allegations that crime is down for so long since then because the police killed off all the so-called bad men, all the killers, all the murderers, all the bad guys.
No, that's certainly not the case. Unfortunately, although there was some deaths, again, we don't know who was killed, who killed them, and what the circumstances of each of those were, so we have to look into that. But certainly, the police are, and the security forces, facing on a daily basis violent criminals. We're recovering numerous firearms, both high-powered weapons and handguns as well. So we are up against a well-armed and effective criminal element that is out there to resist the law and order. So police officers have to take appropriate use of force. The problem is we don't have less lethal options. We also don't have, at the moment, a really effective independent investigative system. Because if police officers know that they're going to be held to account, it's like with criminals. If they know that they're going to be caught for the crime and they're going to be punished for that, then they will think twice about being involved in that type of activity.
So Indicom isn't good enough?
Not yet. I mean, they are getting there. They're short of resources. They're short of the same issues that we face on a daily basis. We're not getting the forensic results and the support that we need to deliver on our investigations on a timely basis.
And perhaps that task will be the legacy of the person who eventually fills Green's enormous shoes. Having secured his own legacy, Green is now looking forward to a relaxing life in retirement back in London with his wife Annette and 2 adult children fresh out of university, who perhaps will give him other things to occupy his time: grandchildren.